Arcane is deeply personal to me. 4 years ago, when I finished Season 1, I remember ruminating over it for weeks, listening to what could have been on repeat, with that iconic image of Jinx standing below the red sun etched into my mind. I made and watched every edit, every YouTube video, and drew every portrait of the characters in my sketchbook. I needed more Arcane content like I needed Shimmer. It was just one of those shows that was so special it lived rent-free in my head after watching it. After seemingly no time at all though, with the release of the second and final season, I think it's safe to say that Arcane has solidified itself as my favorite show of all time, even with Season 2's widely discussed pacing issues. And I'm not alone in this sentiment. It's no surprise by now that Arcane is widely regarded as one of the best animated pieces of media ever, with a budget of $250 million, higher than any other animated series ever made. As of writing this, it is the most popular Netflix show in over 60 countries. But as much as I adore the beautiful art style, the meticulously detailed animation, and the bone-chilling score, what set it apart from other shows for me, what caused these arcane blues, as I called it, to linger in my mind, was always the characters. In the expansive fantasy universe of Runeterra, Arcane was and is a show grounded in humanity. It's a show about relatable, ordinary people with good intentions in unfortunate circumstances. It's a show about family, loyalty, betrayal, love, and creativity. Above all, it's a show about the human experience and what it means to live and die. Despite the fantastical elements, Arcane still has a message to send for everyone watching. So then, what exactly is that message?
Cause I ain't scared of living.
Listen, can you hear? No.
No, I ain't scared.
A few years after I finished the first season of Arcane, one of my teachers introduced me to the contrasting philosophies of rationalism and romanticism. Whereas rationalists like René Descartes concern themselves with reason, logic, and analytical concrete proof above all else, to the point of Descartes proving only the certainty of his own existence, as embodied in the phrase, "I think, therefore I am," romantics focused on passion, spontaneous emotion, beauty, and artistic expression. While I caught myself falling into the rationalist behavior I was conditioned into, craving certainty, overthinking, rapidly calculating the infinite outcomes of every decision in analysis paralysis, what I really wanted to be was a romantic. I wanted to live and feel deeply and sensitively, to be swept away by the exhilarating adventure of the present moment, following wherever life took me. I envied those who were able to dive headfirst into the depths of what the human condition had to offer, to live instead of survive. The good thing about fictional works like Arcane, though, is its ability to bottle these themes into a digestible microcosm. And one of the most important themes of Romanticism is its emphasis on emotions, especially in response to suffering. Arcane has examples of this in abundance, from Vi's harsh upbringing in the Undercity that required her to fight to protect her loved ones and resort to petty crime, to Jinx's lifelong burdens of guilt and shame after inadvertently causing the deaths of her adoptive family. Suffering has become so ingrained in these characters that it's shaped them into who they are, for better or for worse. For Vi, it made her strong and brave, yet compassionate and loyal, fighting out of love for her friends and family. For Jinx, it made her agile and ruthless, a feared outlaw wreaking havoc as a symbol of Zaun's wrath. However, unlike fiction, real life often doesn't take us on these defined character arcs and time skips, chiseling us into these physically strong badass fighters. We like to tell ourselves God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. But what happens when this strength becomes less obvious to the eye, or indiscernible in the moment? Unlike with Vi or Jinx, the line between trauma and hardship, quote-unquote, building character, and simply causing meaningless pain becomes blurred. Our desire to attach meaning to our suffering and to believe in an ultimate trial of character that it'll bring us on is consoling, providing hope at the end of the tunnel. However, Vi and Jinx are only two characters that we follow in Zaun. For all residents of the Undercity, their lives are likely characterized by similar hardship, with many untold stories providing no dramatic, satisfying character arc or meaning to their suffering. Loris, for example, is largely a background character, a gentle giant who extended a hand of compassion toward Vi when she needed it. then killed in the final battle between Noxian and Victor's forces versus Piltover and Zahn. But he receives no funeral, no dramatic last stand or final words, no powerful emotional sequence like with Isha's sacrifice, nothing to show for the adversity he faced as a Zahnite. He's shot by an arrow and slumps dead in his seat, moved aside by a fellow soldier. In reality, this is how death comes for many, especially for those in oppressed positions such as the Undercity or for combatants. The Reaper plays no outro music, extends no mercy, and is indiscriminate in his arrival. So then, how do we find meaning and value in our suffering and eventual death? The answer is that we shouldn't. It's often said that we, especially artists and creatives, like to romanticize suffering, to inflate and distort it into an idealized aesthetic to which we can illustrate or perform. But, as I interpret it, this is a misleading term. Romanticism doesn't aim to distort reality or delude us into thinking we are experiencing something we're not. Romanticism encourages us to live life in the present and find beauty in whatever the present offers, not escape into our heads. In fact, the act of trying to logically prescribe an ultimate purpose for our suffering is rationalist, as we are literally trying to rationalize the challenges we face and assign them to easily definable outcomes or character traits. Sure, if Powder hadn't killed Milo and Claggor and Vi had died instead, she would have lived a much different life, as we see in Season 2, Episode 7. But in real life, there are no alternate universes to travel to, and to ruminate on what could have been prevents one from focusing on what could be. Echo understands this principle, hence why he chooses to give up living in an alternate universe with Powder to save the future of his own. In the dance scene with Powder, he fully embraces the elation he feels, with the low frame rate symbolizing his savoring of the moment for as long as possible. In my opinion, this is one of the most clearly romantic scenes in the entire show, both in the conventional sense of the word and philosophically. In that moment, with the soundtrack drowning out the rest of the world, it's just Echo and Powder together, forgetting their troubles and feeling the music. Likewise, when he needs to go back home, he doesn't dwell on what could have been, but lets his emotions pass and pushes on. Ultimately, Echo understands that there's no use of asking, what if this suffering was for nothing? Or, what if things were different? Instead, Echo's resilience shows us the value of looking toward and appreciating the present, in line with romantic philosophy. However, some might believe that embracing pain and seemingly meaningless suffering is pessimistic and discouraging. This can be seen through Jinx's lack of a will to live. As early as Season 1, we see Jinx detonating a grenade on the bridge during her fight with Echo, an act that should have killed her if not for Singed reviving her with Shimmer. In Season 2, this is made explicitly clear, with Jinx stating that, quote, "there is no good version of me," unquote, and attempting to blow herself up multiple times, if not for Echo's time reversal capabilities. In addition to the dramatic irony of us as the audience knowing that there is a good version of her, this line also illustrates Jinx's inability to see past what her suffering has defined her as. In this way, Jinx tries to use death as an escape from her emotional pain and trauma, believing it insurmountable. She has internalized her pain so much that it's defined her, and, seeing no light at the end of the tunnel or ultimate benefit or deeper meaning from her suffering, she believes that the only way out is death. However, although it's not explicitly shown, it's heavily implied that Jinx remained alive after detonating her grenade near Warwick, as seen from her Shimmer trail, Kaylin's examination of the air ducts, the airship that was shown in the final sequence, and the Jinx font spelling "the end." In this way, as her hallucination of Silco tells her to do, Jinx finally walks away from the cycle at the end of Season 2, abandoning her rationalization of her suffering. It takes until the end of the show for Jinx to understand the error of internalizing her trauma and letting it define her. Instead of believing that her guilt and past hardship forced her to become a Jinx, she chose to sail away from Piltover and Zahn and forge her own path in the purposely ambiguous ending. John Keats's poem Ode on Melancholy reinforces this, warning against distraction, numbness, or death as an escape from sadness, stating, quote, "Go not to Lethe, neither twist wolfsbane tight-rooted for its poisonous wine," unquote. In Greek mythology, the river Lethe, one of the rivers of the underworld, grants forgetfulness for all those that drink from it. Wolfsbane plants are poisonous to humans and animals alike. Essentially, Keats tells the reader not to forget their pain or poison themselves to escape their melancholy, but to, quote, "glut thy sorrow on a morning rose, or on the rainbow of the salt sand wave, or on the wealth of globed peonies," unquote. essentially saying to continue to persevere and look for beauty in the world, despite temptations of escape or numbness. He closes his poem by stating, quote, "In the very temple of delight, veiled melancholy has her sovereign shrine," unquote, asserting that all beautiful things in life contain a degree of melancholy due to their impermanence, and fully embracing joy and sadness is the only way to move forward and live a fulfilling life of diverse experiences. Thus, in Arcane, staying attached to the notion of meaningful suffering acts as shackles for Jinx. To Silco, letting her guilt fester and mold her into a killer made her perfect, holding her back from believing she can change. However, upon realizing the futility of letting her past define her, she breaks free from these shackles, choosing to chart her own path and live an unburdened life rather than kill herself. Overall, Romanticism aims to find beauty in present reality, and that means letting go of the past and allowing the present moment to unfold in its entirety. The Romantic encourages us to fully feel and express the emotions associated with suffering as facts of life and our circumstances, but not to dwell on them or prescribe external attachments of imaginary meaning, lest they define us like how they did with Jinx. It tells us to voraciously embrace and experience the peaks and valleys of emotion, from intense love to grief, but to let them wash over us, rather than trying to analyze and intellectualize them. In suffering, rather than trying to deconstruct pain into some expectation or ideal, face it head on and allow it to pass. In happiness, revel in its warmth despite knowing its impermanence. Arcane, by illustrating a romantic rather than rationalist approach to facing hardship, presents suffering as a necessary and beautiful yet violent aspect of the human experience.
I just don't know what I'm supposed to be. Try being a writer, but I hate what I write. And
Although I was first introduced to Romanticism in a philosophical context, Romanticism is more widely recognized as a large-scale artistic and aesthetic movement. In response to the empirical objectivity of the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Reason, Romanticism rose in the late 18th century to recenter the human as the subjective focus. This meant straying from the certainty of logic to allow for creativity and passionate expression, namely through visual and written art. The unique thing about art to me is its purpose. The definition of art has been debated forever, but in my opinion, art is anything created by humans for the sake of its creation and not for any practical application. For example, cavemen wouldn't have had the time or liberty to produce cave paintings if they were too busy trying to survive. Because art and culture can only exist when prerequisites of basic survival needs are met, art, unlike tools or technological inventions, is made for expression and beauty rather than for utilitarian reasons, making it incredibly subjective. There's an objectively more efficient way to cut wood, but there isn't any such equivalent for art and beauty. As opposed to the scientific rationalism of the Enlightenment, Romanticism emphasized the artistic. Arcane, as an artistic masterpiece in its own right, pays homage to this through not only the stylized visuals and music, but also the subject matter. Self-expression is an integral motif throughout the show, namely through Jinx. From as early as Act 1 Season 1, we're introduced to Powder as a creative innovator, tinkering with gadgets, creating puppets, and painting grenades. Even in Zaun's oppressed belly of the beast, Powder's creativity shines through in her creations. Self-expression is integral to Powder's identity. As the youngest and most underestimated of Vi's gang, she expresses herself not through loud words like Milo, but through her gadgets. However, after the time skip, we see that Powder's changed her identity to Jinx, and through that, she's changed her form of expression as well. Under Silco, Jinx's previously innocent expressions of childish imagination morphs into manifestations of her self-hatred and chaotic psyche. Jinx exemplifies Powder's yearning for self-expression cranked to the extreme, transitioning from a meek young child into an imposing destructive force. From her eccentric character design itself, foot-length hair, flashy outlandish pants and boots, and distinguished cloud tattoos, to her exaggerated body movements, Jinx is bombastic and flamboyant, the opposite of Powder. Even in her killing, Jinx makes her violence theatrical, using painted grenades and explosives. In the Season 1 finale, where Jinx captures Caitlyn, Silco, and Vi, the entire sequence is literally played out like a theater scene. From the dinner party props and puppets to the gruesome taunting of Vi at the prospect of Caitlyn's beheading, to the painted gag masks and symbolic chairs for Powder and Jinx, the season 1 finale exemplifies the dramatic theatrical tension of a modern-day Greek tragedy. In season 2, Jinx's bombs painting Piltover in blue further illustrates her violent, chaotic form of self-expression. Jinx is the embodiment of romanticism's embrace of emotional turbulence. She is wild, free, and often irrational, just like emotions are. As opposed to alternate universe Powder, who expresses herself more subtly through paintings, small inventions, and makeup, Jinx's self-expression is literally in your face, transcending her own identity into a larger movement. Her image not only represents herself, but now becomes a symbol for Zaun's grievances and desire for retribution against Piltover, amplified under Caitlyn's martial law. With Jinx as the face of Zaun as a whole becomes a symbol representing the romantic, free, and artistic human spirit, while Piltover symbolizes the utilitarian and rationalist worldview. Piltover is nicknamed the City of Progress, focusing on scientific achievement in academia, dotted with pristine streets and buildings. Meanwhile, Zaun is the epitome of imperfection and creativity, brandishing crooked buildings, wild neon lights, and improvised tools and weapons. Instead of being rational and refined, Zaun is wild and disorderly. Like Powder and the shadow of her siblings, Zaun has always been an underdog, silenced and oppressed by Piltover. However, with Jinx as a proxy, Zaun finally expresses its long pent-up grievances, rebelling against Piltover to break free from its oppression. Romanticism's emphasis on the depths of emotional and artistic expression is made manifest through the color blue. Jinx's paint bombs, Jinx's Hextech rocket launchers, Jinx's followers dyeing their hair blue. In Arcane, blue symbolizes Jinx and Zaun's built-up anger and resentment, finally bursting free from the floodgates and rearing its ugly head. On an individual level, the focus on unrestrained expression at any cost mirrors the familiar tortured artist stereotype. Real-life artists such as Vincent van Gogh, for example, are generally regarded as tragic, misunderstood people recognized too little, too late. Van Gogh suffered from, quote, hallucinations, nightmares, manic episodes, and depressive episodes, unquote, cutting his own ear off and obtaining lead poisoning from his impasto painting technique, eventually taking his own life and believing himself to be a failure. He is perhaps the most famous example of the tortured artist, which was popularized and idealized by the Romantic movement's emphasis on individualism. Even today, examples such as Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse come to mind, young musical talents who each battled mental illness and addiction. The archetype of the self-destructive creative genius channeling their mental turmoil and pain into a source of inspiration for their art can be seen through Jinx, who acts as Arcane's tortured artist. Unlike Van Gogh and the typical tortured artist though, Jinx's art isn't just self-destructive, but destructive to others as well. Her brilliance is allowed to flourish due to her pain. And if there's still any doubt that she's a prodigy, consider that she was able to single-handedly create 2 refined Hextech weapons from improvised scraps when it took Victor and Jace years of funded research. As the tortured artist, Jinx's capabilities for violence illustrates the extreme of romantic expression. On the other end of the spectrum though is Echo, who, like Jinx, is also a creative genius as seen through his hoverboards and Z-Drive. However, despite being just as much of a prodigy as Jinx, he uses his creativity to build rather than destroy. He builds a beautiful community of firelights, stating that, quote, "It's not enough to give people what they need to survive, you have to give them what they need to live," unquote. He believes not only in the sanctity of life, but also in the necessity of the little things in providing a fulfilling and beautiful existence to members of his community. Using a quote from the movie Dead Poets Society, in contrast to the rationalist focus on providing useful things, quote, necessary to sustain life, Echo realizes the importance of art and beauty to make life worth living. In the alternate universe, we see Echo's artistic prowess, not just through his masks and face paint, but also in his beautiful mural of Vi. In this way, Echo is the antithesis of Jinx, not a tortured artist, but a loved one. He represents an alternative to Jinx's unhealthy, violent self-expression by presenting a healthy, constructive form of expression, one that promotes self-love and love for others, rather than the opposite. This sentiment is echoed by mental health research as well, which has criticized the romanticization of mental illness that the tortured artist stereotype has perpetuated. According to a 2018 study by the Inspire Wellbeing Charity and Ulster University, quote, creative workers were 3 times more likely to suffer from mental health problems, unquote, in large part due to their poor working conditions and low compensation, not because of pain being inherently necessary to be creative. In fact, a study by Goldsmiths, University of London, found that, quote, those participating were increasingly creative in both their work and everyday lives when they felt a strong sense of well-being and positive emotions, unquote. Ultimately, both Jinx and Echo exemplify opposite interpretations of romantic expression, with Jinx fitting into the unhealthy, destructive, tortured artist archetype until her eventual redemption at the end of Season 2. Echo, on the other hand, should be who we all strive to be: creative, artistic, and unashamedly expressive, yet compassionate, selfless, and resilient. The true romantic hero.
I tried taking pictures, but they're so mediocre, you know, and every girl goes through a photography phase.
According to Catholic theophilosopher St. Augustine, quote, we cannot act rightly except by this free choice of will, unquote. In other words, free will is the key to morality, as without having a choice, one cannot choose to do good. Although St. Augustine argued this in a religious context, the same principle can be applied elsewhere, especially when examining Victor's glorious evolution. Victor, under the guise of helping people, acts as a messiah-like figure, curing them of their ailments. However, eventually it's revealed that these people that he helped have become his soulless puppets, stripped of their individuality and former identities, assimilated into the Arcane's hive mind. Jace's killing of Victor's original body, however, is the final nail in the coffin that cements his glorious evolution. His statement that, quote, that which inspires us to do our greatest good is also the cause of our greatest evil, unquote, is a paraphrase of St. Augustine's words. Humanity's inherent free will makes us capable of both the good and the bad, to become either saints or sinners. This is the catalyst that estranges Victor from humanity, wishing to evolve mankind into his vision of utopia. However, in doing so, he removes the part of our nature responsible for both good and evil, free will. According to Victor, this was a small price to pay to end the conflict, chaos, and destruction that humanity wrought. However, Jace metaphorically and physically pierces through Victor's mask, telling him that it was Victor's humanity that shaped him into who he is. Victor's mask symbolizes his unsuccessful attempt to abandon his origins, and the shattering of his mask unveils his imperfect essence that he can never truly abandon. Platonic or not, whatever your interpretation, Jace had always cared deeply for Victor, not because he was perfect, but because he was far from it. It wasn't in spite of his imperfections, but because of them that Jace truly cared for Victor. To romanticists, this embrace of imperfection is integral to human identity. To strive for perfection is inherently logical. It implies the existence of a singularity of objective, scientific superiority that one can take concrete steps to achieve. Romanticism asserts that there is no such thing, and it is the unique, unpredictable imperfections in each individual that gives them value. Jace understood this tenet, causing him to convince Victor of his error. Victor's eventual rejection of his glorious evolution illustrates the importance of self-acceptance and self-love in order to accept others. I think Victor, as a Zonite with various physical ailments throughout his entire life, likely felt inferior in some ways to others around him, whether it be Jace, the Piltovian man of progress, publicly taking the limelight and receiving all the recognition, or generally those around him who didn't have to deal with the health issues that made him physically frail. If not that, he at least felt significantly hindered by these obstacles, so when given the opportunity to transcend his mortal body and help others do the same, he finally felt free from the limitations that he had been chained under all his life. To him, these imperfections did nothing but bring him pain and reduce his opportunities, and so he was eager to shed them. However, it's only when Jace reassures him that Victor's mask breaks. Without seeing value in his own imperfections, he couldn't see the value in others. Jace helped him accept himself, thus leading to his abandonment of the pursuit of perfection. This interpretation of unconditional acceptance can be found in the works of many philosophers, such as Kierkegaard's Works of Love, which asserted that, quote, when one sees what is unlovely in another, one must love all the more, When one sees what is unworthy in another, one must be all the more moved to love if love is truly to be love." Unquote. Similarly, Nietzsche, and thus Book Zarathustra, introduced the idea of amor fati, or the love of fate, which argued for accepting all that happens in one's life, including pain and loss. Amor fati, although not strictly about loving individuals, still encourages embracing life completely, even with its imperfections. This illustrates an overlap between Stoicism, which advocates for worrying only about what one can control, and Romanticism, which advocates for surrendering to and embracing imperfect spontaneity and emotion. Victor's character arc illustrates how embracing these imperfections in life and in oneself is the only way to truly connect with other humans.
You'll figure that out. I'm not worried about you.
There's no debate that Arcane is a beautiful show. Nearly every frame can stand alone as a full-scale illustration in and of itself. The art style is such a unique blend of 3D and 2D animation that it's become a case study for artists all over the world. However, more than that, the topics that Arcane explores are just as captivating. It delves deep into the recesses of what it means to live, what it means to suffer, and what it means to create. Through a romantic perspective, Arcane teaches us the importance of letting go, of desperately trying to rationalize everything about our lives. After all, many things in the show aren't rational or realistic at all. This is a setting where science acts as a channel for magic, where time travel and interdimensional travel is possible, where souls can be linked and unlinked in some astral realm. Instead, Arcane encourages us to live life fully and embrace all its ups and downs, all its moments of joy and sadness. It tells us that beauty is not just found in the aesthetically pleasing or blissful, but in the full spectrum of human experience. It pushes us to go along for the ride, instead of gripping the steering wheel white-knuckled, and allow ourselves to authentically feel and express all that comes with being human, even if it means expressing sorrow and grief. After all, as Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "'Tis better to have loved and lost, than never to have loved at all."